So much of my work as a psychologist revolves around this concept called acceptance. What is acceptance? Think about it in this way. All of us go out and live in a world that we don't necessarily like all aspects of. And so when we find something that we don't like, we tend to go out and try and change it. We place some sort of influence, we go out and avoid those situations, or we try and, let's say, control it so that we make it more favorable, or we make it the way that we want it to look like for us. That's all well and good when you think about how we tend to kind of meet the world. There's lots of things that we can't change. So an example of this might be, if it's cold in your home, you can go out and turn the heater on. And so you've gone out and identified something that you're uncomfortable with, and then you get up, you move a switch, and the heater comes on, and then it's comfortable. So we go out and we can kind of take charge of that, take control of that, influence that quite easily. Then what happens is we might find that someone else in the house doesn't feel cold, and in actual fact is now feeling too hot. So they walk up and they turn the heater down. And so what they're doing is they're doing the exact control mechanism as you. They're finding something where they're feeling uncomfortable, that they're not at their favorable temperature, and so they go out and adjust it. And now you're in a situation where you can go out and control the situation again. For example, you can go out and flick the heater back on or turn it back up. But what you'll find is that the other person in the house will do it again. And so all of a sudden, one person will speak out and they'll say, "Hey, can you stop turning on the heater? Or can you please stop turning it off?" And so you get into a disagreement, and what that is try to influence each other, control each other, so that they behave in accordance with the way that you want the world to be. And this is where people can have disputes everywhere and anywhere. You know, they can argue about how the world is, the temperature, they can argue about time frames, they can argue about how kids are raised, they can argue about how management are treating them at work, they can argue about the time that it takes to go to the shops, they can argue that, you know, shops these days have these electronic counters that are self-serve, and so they can go out and basically argue with the world, wrestle with the world, fight the world in an attempt to, I suppose, change it, to establish some control or aggression, to go out and place influence and change the world. And life doesn't work that way. And so what happens is, by virtue of going out and fighting and wrestling the world, people get frustrated, they get irritated. And in there lies the concept, and where it was born, to go out and accept the world. Now what's interesting is, psychology is not actually asking anybody to accept the world when they can go out and place influence or place some sort of control over it in a functional way. Psychology just identifies that often a lot of these things that we are not accepting and then we place control and influence on either are not controllable or are non-functional, because you're ultimately going to go out and find that situation again. There's a secondary component to this, and that is often what we find is that when people are going out and controlling the situation or trying to avoid their discomfort, they have to go out and use up a lot of resources to go out and achieve this. So let's think about this from an obsessive compulsive scenario. Someone who goes out and they feel uncomfortable going to bed without having checked all their windows to make sure that they're locked at night will go out and they'll do the round of the house to check it. And that's probably neither here nor there. But what happens is, over time, the mind, after the round of checking has occurred, they jump into bed, the mind is not satisfied, and it says, "Oh, have I gone out and checked all the windows? Did I check that one in the other bedroom?" And it's difficult to have that recall, particularly when you're anxious. And so you go, oh, I don't know, I'm going to have to check again. And so the person does a second round of checking windows. Or it might be, I need to go out and start checking power points in the house, or I've got to go out and check the stove top. You know, the next morning it might be, I need to check the garage doors closed after I've left the house because I just can't remember. I need to go back inside to check if I've turned the iron off, or I need to check the front door again. You see, if we can't go out and live with uncertainty or discomfort around, I can't remember whether I did it or not, we then have to go out and apply more and more effort, more and more time to go out and just simply leave the house, or simply go to bed, or, you know, the many other thousands of things that could be occurring that require checking, for example. And so experiential acceptance, or acceptance of thoughts, that sort of diffusion space in an acceptance and commitment therapy model. So acceptance goes out and kind of goes and says, can we go out and make room for the discomfort? Now, one of the greatest examples that I think of you know, building, if I can use the word resilience, or building a capacity to sit with discomfort, is my time in the military. So once upon a time, I worked as a mechanic, a diesel mechanic. I was a trainee as a diesel mechanic in the Australian Army. And what they used to do is basically ask us to do awful things all the time. And that was in our, you know, our boot camp, you know, we call it recruit training. So what they used to do is ask us to basically not sleep very much, so sleep deprivation. They would ask us to do things very, very fast all the time, so you don't get a rest. You're kind of being pushed around, told what to do. You're asked to go out and go for runs and exhaust yourself physically. And when you feel like you can't run anymore, they ask you to run some more. And so there's just this continual cycle of pushing you to greater and greater lengths of discomfort, of, you know, pain, if you will. And the more you go out and do that, the more that you, I suppose, over time develop a capacity to sit with that level of discomfort. Because when you're a new recruit and you first walk in, you think that you can't, you know, run very far, or that you're not capable of doing the sleep deprivation. And so they only deprive you very little, and they only ask you to exhaust yourself very little at the very start. And then over time they build it up, so that you can be quite exhausted, but also still required to do all the things that they ask you to do, which will be, you know, basically discipline type stuff. They ask you to do lots of things, and you're expected to do them without asking any questions, and that's what you go out and do. And so by virtue of training this, by doing this lots and lots, someone becomes more resilient over time, and they're able to, I'm just reversing here, and they're able to figure out means in which way they can sit with pain, sit with discomfort, and begin to, I suppose, live with the world the way it is rather than the way they want it to be. And voila, all of a sudden they've developed what we would call more acceptance. And so if we can go out and kind of think about this from a psychological perspective, the more resilience we have, the more acceptance we have, we are going to wrestle with the world less. When we wrestle with the world less, we're going to be less stressed, less frustrated, less irritable. We might become more, let's call it, flexible, more patient, more willing to live in this world the way that it is. And we probably then start complaining less, whinging less, you know, being frustrated less, because we're very, very irritable very, very quickly these days. And that's what's interesting, that even a little bit of a temperature change becomes incredibly frustrating for people. So think about it this way, that if we can't go out and live in a little bit of temperature change, or we can't live with our responsibilities in life, the demands of life, the fact that we need to go to the shops and we can't be bothered, or, I need an extra pair of shoes because I've only got one pair of shoes, and I want to have more shoes around the house so I don't have to go downstairs or to the other side of the house to grab my shoes again. So I'll get several pairs of shoes and I'll put one on every exit so that I don't have to have the inconvenience of finding my shoes. Then we complain about, but I don't want to work so much because, I just don't want to work so much and it costs so much to live, but I want to have all these pairs of shoes and I want to have all these other conveniences. And so we keep, as human beings, moving towards convenience. Now, none of this is actually wrong. I mean, when we think about it, there's a really functional, reasonable way why we all look for convenience, why we all desire convenience, why we look for, in some sense, the easiest route towards something. And I think that stems from that place called survival. If you can go out and expend the least amount of energy and do it in the most efficient and effective way, then you're going to be ahead of the game. Interestingly though, when we look at it from a psychological perspective, we'll actually recognize that the easiest way or the fastest way is not necessarily easiest over the long term. It's easiest over the short term. And so instead of having delayed gratification, we go for instant gratification. And in there lies a big part of the problem. At the moment, human beings are wildly instant gratification focused. I think we've always been so. But in a world where we've got so much comforts, I think it pays off to have a lot of delayed gratification. And that is, in all concepts. When we think about if you go to university, that's a delayed gratification experience. Relationships. If you want something to last over time, you've got to go out and, suck eggs for a little bit and kind of be frustrated with your partner and feel like you're getting the wrong end of the deal or the short, you're pulling out the short stick all the time. Well, guess what? Relationships tend to pay off over time. But you're going to have to need to do other things in relationships for them to pay off. For example, you need to go out and set boundaries. You need to go out and say no. You need to say, I don't want to be treated this way. You need to go out and apologize sometimes when you've been a fool. You've got to do lots of different things in relationships, in life, for life to pay off. And so that's acceptance. We've got to accept that we've got to go out and be patient. We've got to accept that we've got to put in boundaries. We've got to accept that we've got to go out and apologize sometimes. Now, all those things might not be necessarily your strengths in life, but once again, you can either go out and wrestle with them, or you can go out and accept them and decide whether you're going to enact those and behave in accordance with those, depending on if that's going to take you closer to a valued life, or whether you can just accept it and not worry about having to act on it, which is fine too. So acceptance is really, I think, a huge part of what psychology has to offer, and I think what we can all benefit from. So think about it in this way, can you go out and be more accepting? Can you go out and spend time, in essence, coming to terms with the way that it is and deciding on the things that you desire, that you want, that you are yearning for, and accept the responsibility or the effort that's required in having those things that you yearn for. And then if you yearn for them, and you truly do, kind of going in and adopting to get that thing that I yearn for that's going to give me great satisfaction, richness, joy in my life, I am willing to accept all those difficult things that I don't like. If you're able to go out and kind of think about it in that way, I think that wrestling match might reduce a little bit, and you'll feel a little bit more richer in your life, and you'll have that delayed gratification to be able to obtain those things that give you a richness. But generally speaking, obtaining those things is usually about holding life in a different way, where you're more accepting, you're more flexible, and patient, if you will, mindful of the process of life the way it is. It's kind of like life on life's terms rather than life on Nesh's terms. Because guess what? Life doesn't give a shit about Nesh. Life's just going to do what it does, and it's very rarely going to think about me. So I'm the one that has to go out and consider how am I going to be with the world? Do I want to wrestle with it? Do I want to fight it? Or can I make room for it? So that's acceptance.